This article focuses on prehistorical migration, and historical migration taking place before the emergence of the modern period. See human migration for contemporary migration. Early human migrations began with the movement of Homo erectus out of Africa across Eurasia about 1 million years ago. Homo sapiens appears to have colonized all of Africa about 150 millennia ago, moved out of Africa some 80 kya, and spread across Eurasia and before 40 kya. Migration to the Americas took place about 20 to 15 kY, and by 1 millennium ago, all the Pacific Islands were colonized. Later population movements notably include the Neolithic Revolution and the Bronze Age Indo-European Expansion. Still later the early medieval Great Migrations, and the related Turkic expansion. Much better understood are the Age of Exploration and European colonialism, which led to an accelerated pace of migration over vast distances as new means of transportation emerged. Early migrations. The peopling of the world begins with the spread of Homo erectus out of Africa and across Eurasia beginning about 1 million years ago. Anatomically modern humans appeared about 200 kY, and had diverged into 3 main lineages within Africa by about 100 to 80 kya. L1, a colonizing southern Africa peoples bearers of haplogroup L2, B settling Central and West Africa, while the bearers of haplogroup L3 remained in East Africa. The recent out-of-Africa migration by parts of the L3 population began about 70 kya. This migration mostly replaced the descendants of the earlier expansion. The spread to southern Asia and Australasia dates to about 60 to 50 kya, and the spread into Europe and Central Asia to about 40 kya. Northeast Asian populations first reached the Americas about 30 kya. The specifics of Paleo-Indians' migration to and throughout the Americas, including the exact dates and routes traveled, are subject to ongoing research and discussion. The islands of the Pacific were populated during c. 1600 BC and AD 1000. The Lapita people, who got their name from the archaeological site in Lapita, New Caledonia, where their characteristic pottery was first discovered, came from Austronesia, probably New Guinea, reaching the Solomon Islands around 1600 BC, and later to Fiji, Samoa and Tonga by the beginning of the first millennium BC. Most of Polynesia was a loose web of thriving cultures who settled on the island's coasts and lived off the sea. By 500 BC Micronesia was completely colonized. The last region of Polynesia to be reached was New Zealand in around 1000. The final region to be permanently settled by humans was the Arctic, reached by the Dorset culture during about 500 BC to AD 1500. The Inuit are the descendants of the Thule culture, which emerged from western Alaska around AD 1000 and gradually displaced the Dorset culture. Neolithic Revolution. Agriculture is believed to have first been practiced some 10,000 years ago in the Fertile Crescent. From there, it propagated as a wave across Europe, a view supported by archaeogenetics, reaching northern Europe some 5 millennia ago. VN Bronze Age. The proposed Indo-European migration has variously been dated to the end of the Neolithic, the early Neolithic and the late Paleolithic. The speakers of the Proto-Indo-European language are usually believed to have originated to the north of the Black Sea, and from there they gradually migrated into, and spread their language by cultural diffusion to, Anatolia, Europe, and Central Asia, Iran and South Asia starting from around the end of the Neolithic period. Other theories, such as that of Colin Renfrew, posit their development much earlier, in Anatolia, and claim that Indo-European languages and culture spread as a result of the agricultural revolution in the early Neolithic. Relatively little is known about the inhabitants of pre-Indo-European, Old Europe. They are believed to have been garden plot horticulturalists. The Basque language remains from that era, as do the indigenous languages of the Caucasus. The Sami are genetically distinct among the peoples of Europe, but the Sami languages, as part of the Uralic languages, spread into Europe about the same time as the Indo-European languages. However, since that period speakers of other Uralic languages such as the Finns and the Estonians have had more contact with other Europeans, thus today sharing more genes with them than the Sami. The earliest migrations we can reconstruct from historical sources are those of the second millennium BC. The Proto-Indo-Iranians began their expansion from c. 2000 BC, the Rigveda documenting the presence of early Indo-Aryans in the Punjab from the late 2nd millennium BC, and Iranian tribes being attested in Assyrian sources as in the Iranian plateau from the 9th century BC. In the Late Bronze Age, the Aegean and Anatolia were overrun by moving populations, summarized as the Sea Peoples, leading to the collapse of the Hittite Empire and ushering in the Iron Age. Bantu Expansion. The Bantu Expansion is the major prehistoric migratory pattern that shaped the ethno-linguistic composition of sub-Saharan Africa. The Bantu, a branch of the Niger-Congo phylum, originated in West Africa around the Benue Cross Rivers area in southeastern Nigeria. Beginning in the 2nd millennium BC, they spread to Central Africa, and later, during the 1st millennium BC onward towards southeastern, spreading pastoralism and agriculture. During the 1st millennium AD, they populated southern African. In the process, the Bantu languages displaced the Khoisan languages indigenous to Central and Southern Africa. Iron Age. The Dorian invasion of Greece led to the Greek Dark Ages. Little is known about the period of the 12th to 9th centuries BC, but there were significant population movements throughout Anatolia and the Iranian plateau. Iranian peoples invaded the territory of modern Iran in this period, taking over the Elamite Empire. The Urartians were displaced by Armenians, and the Sumerians and the Mushka migrated from the Caucasus into Anatolia. A Thraco-Sumerian connection links these movements to the Proto-Celtic world of Central Europe, leading to the introduction of iron to Europe and the Celtic expansion to Western Europe and the British Isles around 500 BC. Migration period. Western historians refer to the period of migrations that separated antiquity from the Middle Ages in Europe as the Great Migrations, or as the Migrations period. This period is further divided into two phases. The first phase, from 300 to 500, saw the movement of Germanic, Sarmatian and Hunnic tribes and ended with the settlement of these peoples in the areas of the former Western Roman Empire. The second phase, between 500 and 900, saw Slavic, Turkic and other tribes on the move, resettling in Eastern Europe and gradually making it predominantly Slavic. Moreover, more Germanic tribes migrated within Europe during this period, including the Lombards, and the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes. See also: Avars, Bulgars, Huns, Arabs, Vikings, Varangians. The last phase of the migrations saw the coming of the Hungarians to the Pannonian Plain. German historians of the 19th century referred to these Germanic migrations as the Völkerwanderung, the migrations of the peoples. The European migration period is connected with the simultaneous Turkic expansion, which at first displaced other peoples towards the west, and by high medieval times, the Seljuk Turks themselves reached the Mediterranean. Medieval and early modern Europe. The medieval period, although often presented as a time of limited human mobility and slow social change in the history of Europe, in fact saw widespread movement of peoples. The Vikings from Scandinavia raided all over Europe from the 8th century and settled in many places, including Normandy, the north of England, Scotland and Ireland. The Normans later conquered the Saxon Kingdom of England, most of Ireland, southern Italy and Sicily. Iberia was invaded by Muslim Arabs. Berbers and Moors in the 8th century, founding new kingdoms such as Al-Andalus and bringing with them a wave of settlers from North Africa. In the other direction, European Christian armies conquered Palestine for a time during the Crusades 11th to 13th centuries, founding 3 Christian kingdoms and settling them with Christian knights and their families. This permanent migration was relatively small, however, and was one of the reasons why the Crusaders eventually lost their hold on the Holy Lands. Massive migrations of Germans took place into East Central and Eastern Europe, reaching its peak in the 12th to 14th centuries. These off-seedlung settlements in part followed territorial gains of the Holy Roman Empire, but areas beyond were settled too. At the end of the Middle Ages, the Romani arrived in Europe from the Middle East, originating from the Indus River. Internal European migration stepped up in the early modern period. In this period, major migration within Europe included the recruiting by monarchs of landless laborers to settle depopulated or uncultivated regions and a series of forced migration caused by religious persecution. Notable examples of this phenomenon include the expulsion of the Jews from Spain in 1492, mass migration of Protestants from the Spanish Netherlands to the Dutch Republic after the 1580s, the expulsion of the Moriscos from Spain in 1609, and the expulsion of the Huguenots from France in the 1680s. Since the 14th century, the Serbs started leaving the areas of their medieval kingdom and empire that was overrun by the Ottoman Turks and migrated to the north, to the lands of today's Vojvodina, which was ruled by the Kingdom of Hungary at that time. The Habsburg monarchs of Austria encouraged them to settle on their frontier with the Turks and provide military service by granting them free land and religious toleration. The 2 greatest migrations took place in 1690 and 1737. Other instances of labor recruitments include the plantations of Ireland, the settling of Ireland with Protestant colonists from England, Scotland and Wales in the period 1560 to 1690, and the recruitment of Germans by Catherine the Great of Russia to settle the Volga region in the 18th century. European colonialism from the 16th to the early 20th centuries led to an imposition of European colonies in many regions of the world, particularly in the Americas, South Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa and Australia, where European languages remain either prevalent or in frequent use as administrative languages. Major human migration before the 18th century was largely state-directed. For instance, Spanish emigration to the New World was limited to settlers from Castile who were intended to act as soldiers or administrators. Mass immigration was not encouraged due to a labor shortage in Europe. Europeans also tended to die of tropical diseases in the New World in this period, and for this reason England, France and Spain preferred using slaves as free labor in their American possessions. Many historians attribute a change in this pattern in the 18th century to population increases in Europe. However, in the less tropical regions of North America's east coast, large numbers of religious dissidents, mostly English Puritans, settled during the early 17th century. Spanish restrictions on emigration to Latin America were revoked, and the English colonies in North America also saw a major influx of settlers, attracted by cheap or free land, economic opportunity and the continued lure of religious toleration, a period in which various early English colonies had a significant amount of self-rule prevailed from the time of the Plymouth colony's founding in 1620 through 1676. As the mother country was racked by revolution and general instability. However, King William III decisively intervened in colonial affairs after 1688, and the English colonies gradually came more directly under royal governance, with a marked effect on the type of emigration. During the early 18th century, significant numbers of non-English seekers of greater religious and political freedom were allowed to settle within the British colonies, including Protestant Palatine Germans displaced by French conquest, French Huguenots disenfranchised by an end of religious tolerance, Scotch-Irish Presbyterians, Quakers who were often Welsh, as well as Presbyterian and Catholic Scottish Highlanders seeking a new start after a series of unsuccessful revolts. The English colonists who came during this period were increasingly moved by economic necessity. Some colonies, including Georgia, were settled heavily by petty criminals and indentured servants who hoped to pay off their debts. By 1800, European emigration had transformed the demographic character of the American continent. This was also due in part to the devastating effect of European diseases and warfare on Native American populations. The European settlers' influence elsewhere was less pronounced as in South Asia and Africa. European settlement in this period was limited to a thin layer of administrators, traders and soldiers. Landnahme is a German term, literally translating to land-taking, used for legendary or mythological and historiographical accounts alike concerning how a given people came to inhabit its present territory. Notable landnahme events include the conquest of Canaan in the Hebrew Bible, accounting for the arrival of the Israelites in the Promised Land, the Indo-Aryan Migration and expansion within India alluded to in the Rig Veda, the invasion traditions in the Irish mythological cycle, accounting for how the Gaels came to Ireland, the arrival of the Franks in the territories subsequently known as Francia, the Anglo-Saxon invasion of Britain, the arrival of the Slavs in the course of the Slavic migrations, the settlement of Iceland, the Seljuk invasion of Anatolia, the Hungarian conquest of Pannonia,